What does it take to film a hit television series at negative 30 degrees, without showers, without roads, and sometimes with bears outside your tent? Today on the hot sheet, we are joined by Brian Bitterfeld, an Emmy award-winning cinematographer who spent 7 years shooting Life Below Zero, capturing real survival while he and his crew lived right there alongside the cast. If you love behind-the-scenes content and the real mechanics of unscripted television, hit subscribe and stick with us. Now let's get to it. Brian.
Welcome to the hot sheet. Hello.
How's it going, guys?
Great, man.
Good,
Great.
good. Thank you so much for joining us. And before we dive into Life Below Zero, I have to say I'm in New York City and it's appropriately below zero today. So
I love that.
I'm channeling the Alaska vibes.
Good. I like that.
So, Brian, you know what? I was thinking about your show and I was like, I'm so excited to talk to you because one thing that excites me about the hot sheet, one reason why Sean and I decided to do this was to celebrate the hard work that goes into making these stories. We all have our favorite TV shows like Life Below Zero, and we watch the show and we enjoy it, but we don't often know what goes on behind the scenes, how these shows get made, who are the people behind the scenes making these shows, and that happens to be you. So we are very excited to learn about your journey on Life Below Zero and what that was like. I have like 1,000 questions for you, but I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, on those kind of shows, specifically like Below Zero, there are so many unsung heroes that don't get the recognition they deserve. You know, us crew members who are in the field, we get noticed so much because we're behind the camera. Everyone's in the credits, but people don't think about the people that support us and the people that deal with all the logistics, day and night, cast logistics, weather, location, food, accommodations, all those things that make a show like this run smoothly, or as smoothly as it can be, because so many things can and do go wrong in the field before we launch for a shoot. And yeah, there's just so many cogs in the wheel that make it work that just like not everyone gets to see. What was kind of cool about Life Below Zero is we did do a behind the scenes series on Instagram for a while so people could get a little taste of what was going
Oh,
on.
fun.
But it was tough because we would shoot that on top of what we were already working on. So we'd have a long day of shooting and we'd kind of be like, all right, let's find a little time to like interview ourselves, which is always a little weird. You know, you're not used to being in front of like to gloat about what we were doing or pat ourselves on the back. You know, it just really was a job. But yeah, there's so many logistics that go into Life Below Zero that people just don't get to see when they watch the episode. You know, we film, hours and hours and hours and hours that cut down into 40 minutes. And there's just so much more that goes on
So much more.
beyond those 40 minutes.
Well, that's what I love that. That's what, peer to peer. Sean and I are producers and camera people too. And so we thought, why not bring our friends on the show? Let's talk about these experiences. And hopefully people can watch these shows with a different perspective. Like the other night, I don't know if you guys watched Skyscraper Live with Alex and all climbing the Taipei 101 building. But there's a beautiful shot of the camera guy just hanging in the wind. And you're like, right, yes, he's there filming this for you to all see. So I love those kind of moments. And that's really what our show is about, to share that process, to understand the journey that you guys are having, and to bring, to make these stories happen and come together. Because honestly, every production I've ever been on, it's like a small miracle that it all comes together, right?
Yeah, it
Yeah,
is.
totally. And it's funny too, because a lot of times when you're, watching these shows, you get so invested in the show that you kind of forget there's a guy standing there holding that camera and doing
Yeah.
the day-to-day life that these people are doing. It's like half the time we're freezing. It's miserable, but luckily that doesn't translate through the camera unless you're shaking. You'll probably get a note about that from post. But, people forget that there's a family out there making these shows happen and going through all the odds and ends that come with making a show like that.
There's a whole other world behind the world. So we're going to get very meta How did you get on a show like Life Below Zero? I'm sure not very many people are on that crew.
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that because it totally fell into my lap, and it was totally fate. At the time, before Life Below Zero, I was really just kind of pretty fresh out of college, a couple years, and just doing the freelance thing, figuring it out, doing a lot of odd jobs, and just if I could get paid to have a camera in my hands, that was a good day. And one day or one night, I get this text from my friend Sherry, and she texts me. She says, "Hey, do you want to come with me to Africa to go filming?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, yeah, when are we leaving? She's like, "Next week." So next thing you know, I'm in the doctor's office getting all these vaccines, and the DP that was supposed to go with me ended up pulling out because he had a different shoot. So we go to Africa, and I come home. I'm like, just like, wow, what an amazing journey. You know, it was my first international big film shoot. And I get a text from the DP, and he's like,
Oh, yeah,
"Hey,
what's a
you want to?"
DP
Uh,
for the audience?
yeah, views director of photography. So usually the
Okay.
person kind of in charge of shooting the show and camera choices, lenses. So the director of photography that I was supposed to go with texts me, he goes, "Do you want to go to Alaska and film?" And I'm like, "Oh my gosh!" Like, I just got home from Africa. That I'm still like high off that trip. And so that director of photography who couldn't go to Africa worked on Life Below Zero. So that was my opportunity to go. And at the time I was single. I was, in my early 20s. So it was like perfect timing. I had no obligations. I could just do what I wanted. And I'm like, yeah, Alaska sounds great. So next thing you know, I'm in these story meetings, meeting the supervising producer and kind of getting prepped to go to Anchorage. And one shoot turned into 7 years of my career. And it was just totally unexpected.
Wow. That's
Wow. Wow.
wild. So back up one sec though, because you mentioned Sherry called you. I know Sherry. That's our connection, right? Sherry
Right,
Silvera.
yes, that's right, yeah. I love Sherry. I love Sherry, yes. And so I owe so much to Sherry, and I hope she watches this because she probably doesn't know this and will probably be like, "Nah." I owe so much of my career to her because of that one trip. Like, if I would have not gone on that trip, I would have never met the person from Life Below Zero, who's John Greiber. I would have never met him, and I would have never gotten pulled into this fabulous world of just adventure filmmaking.
That is
So, like,
incredible.
it was
Yeah.
totally fate, and I tell people all the time too, like, you gotta take these opportunities when they come your way, like, for me, that was my big break. Everyone has their big break, whatever that might be, but that was, Sherry really, helped me with that even though she didn't mean to.
Well, actually, funny enough, funny that you say that because Sherry gave me a big break too, actually. Sherry, Sherry is like the queen bee adventure filmmaker. She's like the OG National Geographic travel girl. She's badass. She's traveled the world a million times. She hired me when I was a mountain bike racer. She hired me to ride my bike to Mount Everest base camp for a
Wow.
TV show.
Wow.
And I was a different life. I was a athlete. Anyway, I did this show for Outdoor Life Network, which doesn't even exist anymore. And I was just enamored with filmmaking and adventure filmmaking. And I got into this career because of that experience. And it was because Sherry. So we owe this whole show to Sherry. Yay,
Yeah,
Sherry.
seriously, she's the best. It's so funny when I met her, I knew we met I was freelancing shooting paragliding, I was doing all these odd jobs, and that's how I met Sherry. And I remember I met her and I was terrified of her because I knew how accomplished she was and how badass she was. I was like,
Yeah,
"Don't get on
she's
the
kind of
wrong side of
scary.
this."
She's
She is
definitely scary.
terrified because of respect, because I respect her so much. But
Totally,
so
100%.
that's like how what tipped my career off, and
That's
it's so cool that
amazing.
you can relate to that too, Jennifer. Like
We
those
share
little,
that. That's crazy.
yeah, so funny. So that's how it all started, and from there the rest is history.
Did you know anything about the show? Or what did you know what you were signing up for? Or you just said
No,
yes?
I just said yes because you gotta. I had nothing better to do, and I'm like, I've never been to Alaska. So I like yeah, so I don't know anything about the show, so I look it up, it's on Netflix, I'm like, "Whoa, this is like a pretty big deal," which made me relatively nervous too, but the fact that John Greiber, the director of photography at the time, trusted to bring me out, was a little bit of reassurance, and I knew, I worked so hard, so I knew I was gonna do a good job. It was just a matter of, like, learning the flow and, figuring out how to shoot the show and learning from John Greiber, being so new. So yeah, I just went out. I said yes, looked up the show, watched a couple episodes, did my homework, um, and then I was off.
That's wild.
When you got
Yeah.
that call, did the, production tell you what to bring, or did they have things for you? Like, how did you? Because I've been on shows like that where you'll get a crew member that shows up and they're so unprepared. For this, did
Yeah,
the production prepare you?
they did, and the call was really funny actually, because the call wasn't like, "Hey, we heard you were, a very competent camera operator." My supervising producer, or the supervising producer, who is now a dear friend of mine, called me and says, "Hey, we heard you have a lot of snowmobile experience. We like that." They were more worried about me being able to keep up with the cast than being an operator. They're like, "As long as you're not slowing the whole production down, that's kind of what matters." Because my role too was less shooting and more of being, I was an assistant camera person, an AC. So it was more of batteries, lenses, supporting the other crew members. So they're just like, if you could keep up, that's like great, because they had brought people out before from like LA where, you don't see a lot of snow.
Yeah.
Because before Life Below Zero, I was doing a lot of backcountry ski filming, backcountry snowboard filming. So I was snowmobiling all the time. So that was like their main question. But as far as preparedness goes, their warehouse there was like a private REI. They were like, all you
Oh,
need
well.
are base layers, bring your toothbrush, other creature comforts, but we will gear you up for
Wow.
success.
Oh, so
Because two,
production.
yeah, and because they had been on the air now for when I started was the end of season 6, so they were pretty well prepped, and I think too, I would guess from, like, a liability standpoint, they were required to do that. Because, yeah, there's some shows, they don't give you that luxury. They're just like, "Cool,
No.
you now have to go buy these $1,000 jackets, whatever."
Yeah.
But they had this warehouse, you'd walk in, they'd throw you this huge duffel bag, and they're like, "Go to town." Now, you didn't get to keep that,
Wow.
you returned
Oh,
it,
you
but
didn't?
you're like,
Right.
North Face. No, no,
Okay.
I wish.
Yeah.
When the show ended, though, they did sell everything to make some money back, so I did get some good deals, but because they had to recycle through that, because we had so many crews going out, but yeah, they throw you this big duffel, you had, like, Mountain Hardwear stuff, what's called bunny boots, which are these, like, military grade, like, rubber boots that are really
Yeah.
warm,
Wow.
everything under the sun from REI, yeah.
That's
So
great.
so do
That's
people
cool.
have never seen the show though? This location is just extraordinary. The show is amazing but it's so unique because of the location. Is this right? 197 miles north of the Arctic Circle. Is that where you guys were?
Yeah, well, it depends because the
That's Kavik
show.
Camp. I think that's
Yep,
Kavik.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Kavik River Camp, so that's the northernmost location. And
Okay.
the show had about 5 or 6 different locations because we had 5 or 6 different cast members, so the show kind of followed the lives of 6 different families or individuals that lived a subsistence or off the grid lifestyle, whether that's, so Sue Aikens lived far up north. We had family, Andy Bassett, who lived very close to the Canadian border off the Yukon River. Then we had families that were Western Alaska on the western coast. And all those locations are just so different in their own way. So it's very, very fascinating. But yeah, Kavik River Camp, very, very far above the Arctic Circle and very cool.
How
So the
many of the
whole
locations how many of the locations did you get to experience?
All of them, yeah. With my
Wow.
time there, all
Wow.
of them. I've shot with every cast member, some more than others. Everyone works differently, and I think the success of the show is just making sure crew and cast get along, and every cast member operates differently. They have a different mindset. So production was very specific on where they sent you. There was always a reason, but they also too intentionally switched it up. So, the shots look different. You go to the same place every single time. You start shoot, it kind of starts looking the same, right? You're like, oh, I've
Yeah.
done this drone
Yeah.
shot 1,000 different times, so
When you
it
right.
varied.
talk about getting along with the cast member, where do you sleep at night? Where's the film crew sleep at night?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'd say 90% of the time you're in tents. So whether that's summer, winter, you're in tents. As locations grew, as the show went on and on and on, sometimes we'd have a cast that would build us like a dry cabin, and we'd have a cabin to
Okay.
sleep in. Our crews are really small, so there's 4 of us. So about pre-COVID, it was 3 tents. We'd have a safety manager sleep in their own tent. The director of photography and producer would have a tent, and the AC would have their own tent. And then after COVID, everyone got their own tents for just safety purposes, but usually
Wow.
tents.
Right. So
Wow.
this is an extraordinary location. You need to have all the warmth that you can get because and so in the tents, yeah, I guess do you bring sleeping bags too? I guess, like, what kind of sleeping I just have so many questions.
Yeah, so summertime, it's a lot easier, you get 24 hours of daylight, and depending on your location, it's pretty nice. Sleeping bag, cot, pad. In the wintertime, same setup, but then you'd have a little wood burning stove tent, or a little wood burning stove in the tent. And then we also have what were called diesel drip stoves. So you'd have a big drum of diesel, like a 30-gallon drum on like sawhorses that would drip diesel into a stove, and that would heat the tent all night. So
What
depending on the location, if you were in an area that had minimal wood, you'd have the diesel.
what about wildlife, like sleeping in a tent in the middle of nowhere, Alaska or wherever? Are you afraid of grizzlies and all that? Like, how do you handle that?
Yeah, that's definitely always a topic of conversation when we're going out into a remote location that has more bear activity per se. Like in the interior, sometimes what we'll do is, we'll be in our tents, and what we do is we'll put all the food in the cook tent, and then we have bear fences, which are like little mobile electrical fences, and we'll put that around the tent. We're also equipped with bear spray, and then our safety person, who's also our cook, has, firearms that are there for our safety that rarely get used. And it's just being smart. There was a time where there was a camp that had a problem bear, so a bear that kept coming into camp, and they had to relocate. So that, rather than letting it get to a point where it's like, oh, now we got to shoot this bear, they're like, we're going to choose to move because this is not sustainable for the crew.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. It's pretty scary stuff, man. Sleeping in the middle of Alaska. It's wild.
I whenever there's bears around, I do not sleep with earplugs. No way. I am kind of one eye open. And there have been times you're setting up camp, especially if you're near a river, and you'll see bear tracks, and you're like, okay, this is something to keep in mind and just be smart about. Especially it's just with food, just keep the food out of your tent. Which if you're not used to, and camping in Colorado where I live, that's also a issue too. So I'm used to it, but other people, they don't realize like having your toothpaste in your tent will attract a bear. Toiletries will attract a bear. Anything that has a scent. So just being smart about it.
So this kind of a shoot is not for everyone, that is for sure. But you
No.
seem very comfortable with this kind of an environment, this kind of situation, and you did it for 7 years, so you must what do you love it, or what do you like about it? Like, what attracts you to this kind of filming?
Yeah, I've always been just a huge outdoors person and love filmmaking. So to combine both of those into one was just like a dream come true. Especially living in Colorado. I lived in Aspen for a while, and we hiked a lot and did a lot of backcountry skiing, like I said. And we always called it a sufferfest, but there's like a little bit of pride that comes with it, when you can go out and shoot these spectacular things in these really harsh conditions and then see it on TV. There's a lot of pride that comes with that because it's hard. It's that type 2 fun that you can look back on, and I have so many more good memories than bad. And there have been so many times where I'm like, what are we doing out here? This is horrible. But then at the end of the day, you're in
Yeah.
your tent with your crew, and you're like, we did it again. Like, that's crazy. How fun, as cold as you are, as long as the nights are, these long days, and it's just lack of sleep. At the end of the day, you're always reminiscing on the good parts. And I've always loved that.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that you said that because I think, that's true, like, we these experiences that are hard make you feel alive and like you have a sense of accomplishment because you did it. You camped out in a tent with bears around in freezing cold temperatures and you got this amazing show that millions of people can enjoy and you did that. You brought that to the viewer and that is satisfying. We've all as producers experienced that and that is the joy despite the harsh conditions.
Yeah. It's easy to go into a studio and film with a crew, and you have Crafty right behind you, and you get your break every 6 hours, whatever. But to go and tough it out in the wilderness for, 30 days, no showers, no bathrooms, no, being very self-sustaining is, you know, it just feels really good, because not, like I said, not everyone can do that. Not everyone enjoys that. That's fine. I don't expect people to typically enjoy that, but for me,
Right.
it's a dream.
So walk us through like a typical shoot. Like you get the call, you go to Alaska. What time of year? How long do you go for? What is a typical shoot like that out there?
Yeah, I could give you kind of brief description because it just varies so much based on location and time of year. Whether it's summer, spring, fall, or winter, that was the best part of the shows. They filmed year round. So it was really a lot of work for us freelancers. You get the call, they kind of tell you, you're going to film 3 to 4 episodes. They kind of give you like story guidelines or like story, like they tell you what your episodes are, but we call them more of an outline because if something changes, we go with that change, which I loved about the show because it's very authentic. But typically, we'd fly to Anchorage, have about 2 to 3 days to prep. That'd be meetings with like warehouse crew to get geared up with our personal gear to keep us warm, story meetings with the supervising producer, and then a day to just be with our crew, go shopping, and just get mentally prepared to leave. The next day, depending on where you go, is usually an early flight out. And depending on the location, that could be multiple flights, one commercial flight to a bush plane to a boat, or it could be, you're going to drive from Anchorage to, say, Cantwell or Nenana and then go snowmobile the next day for 70 miles to get to where one of the crew members lives. So it varied.
Wow,
That's
70
insane.
miles? That's
Yeah,
a
so
lot.
Jesse Holmes, who is one of our Dog Mushing cast members, he actually just won the Iditarod last year.
Wow.
Amazing athlete. He lives in Brushkana off the Denali Highway. So I guess so for him it was 35 miles to his camp, and then we'd usually go another 35 to where we would do some of our episode filming. So about 70 miles.
You talked about story a little bit, how you had a plan, and then being where you are, and the cast member is living in this life, and they need to make changes. There's other things that become a priority and kind of change your story narrative. I mean, can you explain that a little bit? I guess how that happens, like
Yeah,
who
totally. Being able to pivot in this industry, especially for the story producers, is super important because we are there to document their life. And we do, the producers, supervising producers plan ahead what the cast members want to do on film, whether it's a caribou hunt, maybe we're going net fishing, or we're going to go build a trapping cabin or, whatever. So for instance, we had to go film a seal hunt one summer and we were on a river that was tidal. We were so close to the ocean when the tide went out, the rivers would go down. And we're, film the whole intro. We get them out leaving on the drone in the water to go hunt this seal, and their motor hits a rock, and the motor dies, and they have to paddle all the way back to shore, which is like pretty far away. So that turned into our story. It wasn't like, oh, we'll fix the boat tomorrow and keep filming the seal hunt. It's like, okay, now the story is how do we get home safely? Because this
yeah,
is real life. Like their engine died and they're
yeah.
they have paddles now. So it's like documenting that. So, keeping it as authentic as possible, not forcing them to do something they probably wouldn't.
To the viewers that haven't seen the show though, it's about subsistence hunters in this remote area, and the show illustrates their sort of daily and seasonal activities to make their living. So all these scenes that you're describing is basically surviving and living in this outback. And that becomes very packed with stakes and high adventure and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it's and it can vary too, sometimes we film them, especially if we like some of our cast members have families, so they have kids. So we'll do like an episode on like arts and crafts and like focusing on in some of the indigenous culture too, because we have some indigenous cast members. So like we'll go out, shoot an episode of them beachcombing and they find a piece of whale baleen, which is like the inside of a whale's mouth, and they'll like etch drawings onto it, and that'll be the episode. So it can be really really wholesome sometimes too. It's not all killing animals and skinning and tanning hides. It can be very like down to earth and mellow too, because that is part of living out there. Is you have to maintain your sanity somehow. You can't just go shooting animals every day, especially if you don't need to, right?
So you had this incredible experience during COVID. If you can tell us that story.
Yeah, sure. Life Below Zero and the rest of the entertainment industry shut down. And we were shut down for about 4 months, which was really hard for just everybody, stuck at home. And then finally, when things picked back up and studios could figure out a way to safely get their crews into the field. I got a call to go back out. And the thing was, Nat Geo bought, X amount of episodes from us. So after the 4-month lull, they were like, okay, you guys have to go back in the field, but you have to pick up all the slack that you lost when you were home during COVID. So instead of shooting 3 or 4 episodes, we had been hired to shoot 10, which is a lot.
Whoa, that's a
10
lot.
Wow.
episodes, yeah. And depending on the nature of the episode, they could take one episode could take a week. We've had episodes take 10 days. It just depends on if the production company wants to keep putting money into finishing it. So our location was Kewalik, which is a super remote, one of the most remote locations we would film on, which is Western Alaska. And to get there in itself is a journey. So we fly into Anchorage, prep for the 10 episode trip, which was a lot of meal prepping, a lot of gear prepping, just making sure we had everything we needed.
Oh, so you
And
bring in your own food.
yep, because I mean, where we were camping, if you stood outside your tent, you couldn't see anything for 100 miles. It's just tundra. There's
Wow.
nothing like to get, and you'll learn more when I explain how to get there. So food prep. So we finally fly up, and to get there, you take a commercial flight from Anchorage to Kotzebue. Kotzebue is kind of village. Yeah, it's a village. From Kotzebue, we would transfer into 2 smaller planes called caravans, which are prop planes. Fly from Kotzebue to Candle, which is an abandoned mining town, just a gravel strip. There's one family there that runs the airstrip. They still mine. They're like a mom, dad, and 2 sons. You land in Candle, unload everything from the 2 caravans, which includes an inflatable boat. You then inflate the boat at the riverbank, install the motor, which is not on the boat. You unbox it, install a, outboard motor. It's like a little 20 horsepower thing. Then
So you
if
have
the
a
tide is,
pump to
we are
inflate the boat?
foot pumping
Full
this
foot
little
pump.
blow up and taking turns because it takes forever. So
I
by
was
then
gonna
we've already been traveling for hours. So it's summer, sun doesn't go down. So it's like, well, we got to get there. Then you inflate the boat, and hopefully the tide is high enough because, like I said, this river was tidal. So if it was low, we'd have to wait. It's like, all right, we just got to wait another 6 hours till the tide comes up. Load up the boat, and then it was a 30-minute boat ride to our camp area. And then you do pelican cases, tables, tents, cots, you name it, anything you need to stay for an extended period of time. And then we did about 30 boat rounders. So it took about 24 hours to load into this camp. Then you
What?
Wow.
get to camp, and then it's okay. We have to set the tents up, set up our food situation, I'm prepping the cameras, which was like 3 main cameras and like GoPros and gimbals and drones and stills cameras. So just getting there was a feat in itself. And then you're there and then you have to get like settled. And so we were there and 10
And meanwhile,
episodes.
you get paid. Do you get paid half a travel day for that too?
No, they paid us full rate. They understood and that's the
Good.
thing. They knew what we were dealing with and they respected us and they understood how much effort it took just to get there. And God forbid you forget something important. It's, and that's why they give us 3 days of prep. So, we get there and start filming and, because everyone had been off of work for 4 months, it was just kind of like this rejoice and being together again with this crew and cast we hadn't seen in a long time. And yeah, and it took us about 63 days to complete the 10 episodes. We were camping for 60 days. No running
Wow.
water. We were filtering water from the river. We also brought water jugs, but then when those would run out, we'd filter water. About halfway through, we'd have a resupply. So we'd boat back to Candle and the production company. We'd send them a list like, what do we need? Whether it's food, hygienic stuff, little things to keep us from going crazy. Meet at the runway.
Cards. Do you play cards?
Yeah, tons of cribbage, tons of backgammon, beer. So, but yeah, it was a really, really long shoot. And I'll never forget we separated our camp from our cast because having that separation was very important to film with them all day, but go home to our own place so we can vent and just shoot the shit and just that separation was important. So every morning we'd boat to their camp, and this family lived in a teepee. They were in a teepee for the 2
Wow.
months, with I think there was like 8 or 9 of them 8, about 8. They had a big
And
family.
one teepee?
And then sometimes one of them would have,
Wow.
like, their own tent if they wanted their own space, but usually they'd be in the teepee with a little
Wow.
wood-burning stove. And we're in the boat, and we're all looking and we're all like, "Oh, man, day 30, halfway there." Like, nervously laugh at each other, like, "Oh my god, we've been here for so long." Yeah, to this date, one of the best shoots I've ever been on. It was so beautiful, and we filmed just some amazing things, and we had a really, really
Wow.
good crew.
One detail the viewers definitely don't know about, and this detail stuck in my mind, but you said you had to pack in a 5-gallon bucket and a toilet seat for the top, right?
Yep.
Now that's commitment to the shoot, right?
Yes.
Did you
One of
really
the
carry you, like, brought a toilet seat with you guys, like the top?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, you gotta sit on it. You gotta be comfy. Sometimes you'd have this, like, mini tent that would go over it, but, like, we were just like, "Put it behind a bush so you get a nice view, get the wind," you know? Because if there was no wind, like, this location had so many mosquitoes, I can't even tell you how many mosquitoes were in
That's the
this
Oh,
worst.
location. I mean, thousands. But during the shoot, we had this, like, sea breeze the whole time, so the mosquitoes were, like, at bay. But, yeah,
ugh.
you did the 5-gallon the luggable loo, we called it,
The
the 5-gallon bucket. Best seat in the house, beautiful views, see 50 miles.
Now
That's
that is some
great.
dedication to the job.
It was something.
And how
And
did
the
you
and
guys
the average
shower?
duration of a shoot was what? Like a normal non-COVID shoot was how long?
A normal non-COVID shoot would be 15 to 18 days, so this was
Wow.
significantly longer.
Oh,
It was
wow,
about
it's
3
compared to
times the
60
length.
days.
Yeah, it was a
S
lot.
And how do you shower and stuff? What do you do? That's a stinky crew if you don't shower for 60
Yeah,
days.
totally, and hygiene is something no one thinks about. Remember, people, like, forget we're out there filming. Hygiene
Yeah,
is so vital and important, and if you have poor hygiene, it can really make for a very uncomfortable experience. There are a few
sure.
ways to shower. One is you could do, we'd call them, like, little bird baths, so you boil water, throw it in a tote, and just washcloth in your tent, easy. Or where we were on a river, so you just have to muster up the courage, jump in the
Ooh.
freezing water, jump back out, suds up, jump back in and come out, and but, for your mental health, like, taking a shower the next day, you were, like, re-energized. It was, like, amazing. But we'd shower every, like, oh gosh, I don't know, like, once a week. It was tough. It was tough.
That's
I've done a
tough.
couple shoots in environments like this. The hardest part is the non-showering part. You just get sticky and grimy, and like you said, for your mental
Ugh,
health, it is
It's tough.
such a huge boost when you can get a little bit of a
It
shower,
it
but
it Yeah, just brushing your teeth feels better, putting deodorant on, like, we'd always pack wet wipes, which would kinda help, and I actually preferred shooting in the winter because of that, because in the cold, you don't sweat as much, it's not muddy, it's not hot, so people are like, "How why do you like the cold?" I'm like, "'Cause I don't smell as bad, I feel better." In the
I
summer,
don't
I mean,
smell
in the
it.
summer,
That's
we wear, like, bug nets, and you're just, like, geared up. In the summer, you're not in T-shirts and shorts because there's so many bugs. So you're still,
yeah.
like, kinda covered. You got a buff on, a hat, like, you're still covered head to toe. And, especially if we're, like, filming trapping, we're hiking for miles. We'll hike for miles with all our gear, and you get back, you're just a sweaty mess. And also, like, hats off to the woman on our show, because that's, like, a whole 'nother ballgame of hygiene. I mean, I'm not gonna get into dirty details, but, it's just
Yeah, that's
it's
an
different.
interesting issue for sure. I can't
Mhm.
imagine. I wonder,
Yeah.
Sue Akins must know. I mean, she is such a badass. I'm obsessed with her. I just watched the Joe Rogan interview with her and I was just like, this woman, she is in a league of her own. She's truly extraordinary. Did you get to meet Sue and film with Sue?
Yeah, yeah, I've filmed with Sue a few times. She is one of a kind. She is an amazing woman, a total badass. One of my first shoots as a director of photography was with her, which I was, really grateful to do because she's one of our most popular cast members. Yeah, she's amazing. And that her location is actually one of the locations where we have accommodations because she has Kavik River Camp. So we actually
Mhm.
get these little apartments that are like on like snow tracks that we stay in that are pretty funny.
Oh, that's
How
great.
fun. Yeah, I just listened to that in preparation for this show. I listened to that interview with her and Joe Rogan. It was quite a long time ago, but so amazing. Like
Hmm.
She's just a tough lady. I love her.
Yeah, no, super tough,
So
but
yeah, so quickly though, you said you started the show as an assistant camera, but you grew up on the show and became the director of photography eventually? Did you just say that?
yeah, and so I started as an assistant camera guy, and then over the years just kind of made it known that I wanted to grow and level up my position and eventually started DPing. But I wasn't the only DP on the show because say my crew was out filming, there are 3 other crews filming.
Right,
So
right.
each crew has their own DP, but I did become one of the directors of photography, which was a
That's
huge
neat.
accomplishment. Yeah, huge accomplishment. I was working a lot to get to that position, and it took 3 years for them to finally entrust me to take on that kind of responsibility, which I totally understand. But I was taught by the best, so yeah.
That's great. You literally grew up on the show then.
Hmm.
Like, that's amazing. And then and you won a some awards, right? Didn't you win an Emmy for that?
Yep. Yeah. So won a primetime Emmy for outstanding cinematography, which was very humbling and grateful for. And it was really funny too, actually, when that happened because I was still very new in my career, and that happened, and I think I was like 28, and I was like, oh no, it's all downhill from here now. It's like this can't be the pinnacle. I'm just getting started. I ended up on a show at the right place at the right time, and of course, I worked really hard for that too. Um, but at the time too, Life Below Zero was winning a lot of awards. It was being recognized as one of Nat Geo's top-rated shows, which is such a shame that it got canceled. Just the things going on in Hollywood, but yeah, won a primetime Emmy, and then last year was nominated for another one. So, super grateful for what that show has given me.
Why do you
Well,
think that show
20
did so well?
yeah.
That show did so well because we were given creative control. When we went out into the field, we didn't have a producer breathing behind our back, holding a monitor, looking at our shots, saying, I don't like this, do it this way. They entrusted us and they gave us the flexibility and the ability to make the show look as best as it possibly could. And that's
You
why it did
mean
so well.
so National Geographic granted you that latitude. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, it was a balance between it was produced by BBC, aired on Nat Geo, but yeah, just the production company was just kind of like, yeah, go, have fun, do what you do best. We trust you guys, and when we get this footage back, we're gonna be able to cut a really amazing show. They weren't like, you have to do it this way, like, and we did have like a formula, we call it, but they just gave us the freedom to make it look as good as we could, and that's why I think why it did so well.
Were you the producer too, or did you serve like a dual role as a sort of producer? Or were you just in charge of photography?
Well, it was all a collaboration between all the crew members. But so the crew was a director of photography, then you had a producer shooter, and then an assistant camera person. That's who filmed, and then you had your safety person who cooked and was in charge of in-field logistics. So I didn't produce per se, like that was never my role, but I collaborated with the producer plenty to come up with ideas, especially when we had to pivot and we'd be sitting there at night and be like, okay, how do we pivot and finish our episode where it makes sense visually and story wise. But I was never a field producer. No.
Got it.
Logistically speaking, with story, if there was a big pivot, like, did you guys have sat phones? Would you call back to base camp and say, "Hey, we want to make these changes," or were you at liberty
Yeah.
just to make that change?
No. Every night we touch base with the production office to just give a lowdown on what we did today. These are the beats we covered. How many more days we think we need in the field. But yeah, when there's a big pivot, we say, hey, this happened today. This is what we're thinking about doing moving forward, and they kind of collaborate with us as well to think like, okay, this is a good idea, or maybe we should try something else.
Uh,
That's so
mm,
interesting. So to the viewers and the audience, these crews work in different ways. Like different shows require different setups and crew configurations and hierarchies and all that kind of stuff. But what makes this show so unique is exactly what you just said is it was more of a collaborative process between a very small intimate crew and you can make creative decisions together and work with the talent in a very sort of intimate way, I would imagine. And you came up with the best stuff, which is amazing. That's like it's really neat.
Yeah, no, this is again why the show did so well is because of the collaboration, the honesty, the openness between crew members. I've worked on other shows where it's like, if I kind of like put out an idea, you get shut down immediately. They're like, you're
Mm,
the camera guy, you don't ask questions. Story is my job. And our show did so well because after every episode we do these long interviews where we do a recap and ask questions to fill in the gaps, and the producer would be asking questions, and every time they'd look back at me like, do you have any questions you want to ask, Brian? And I'd be like, yeah, I
nice.
thought of this one that you didn't ask, and I asked you like, that's a great question. And so many shows miss out on that because they feel like they're entitled to their job and they've worked so hard for their job that if anyone else is going to kind of like make a peep that they're getting stepped on. And it's this, I don't know the word for it, not egotistical, but people just don't know how to collaborate. But Like Below Zero was all about collaboration, all about having a good time and doing a good job. And that's why it was so successful. And all the stories were just so well thought out. And yeah, I can't say any more good things about it because it's the way shows should be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you had an incredible setting. Like if you have a character like Sue Aikens, all you need to do is just show up and film her doing her life, right? Like you have this incredible setting, this incredible character. Don't get in her way, you know?
Yeah, with her, the cameras start rolling and she's just off to the races. She had been doing it for so long and she's just so charismatic and has so much personality that she didn't require a lot of coaching. It wasn't a lot of like, oh, could you do this or say this? It was just like she just had the gold. She would just
Just
spit great one-liners and we're just like, this is
just
too
do
easy. Like
Sue. Just
she's
do
just
Sue.
she was just such a pro and just such a natural and she was herself and that's what mattered, right? Whenever you work with someone who's never been on TV, it's very like they're very stiff and don't know what to do and like they're like, what do I say?
Yeah.
She's just like it's like we weren't even there, which is why it was so easy and fun to film with her. You're just in Sue's world.
Yeah.
Yes, you are. She's the only one that lives up there. She lives
Yeah,
by herself up there.
yeah, yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
Well, I would imagine you'd have to establish a trust with her since, this is a dangerous environment, a special environment, and this is her world or and the other cast members' world. Um, did you have to kind of earn their trust or how did that work in terms of getting access to them in their personal lives?
Yeah, every cast member you did, especially if you had never worked with them before, there was always a little hesitation. And just for me, it was a matter of less talking, more listening, learning how to understand them, especially the interactions between our cast and the producers, because they did most of the talking because, they're creating the story. And then, if I needed shots, choosing the right time to ask for those shots and not coming in all hot, like I'm the DP and I own this shit, really like taking it with a grain of salt and just being gentle and patient, finding patience. I learned a lot of patience on this show because it's nerve wracking too if you've never met someone and you're in their world, you're living with them, and you rely on them to get the shots you need. So yeah, building that trust, and a lot of that trust too is built when the cameras weren't rolling. I had someone ask me, they're like, "Oh, it's documentary style, but you do you just not talk to them ever?" And I'm like, no, we talk to them as much as we can because that's how we can build those working relationships and enjoy each other's company and build that trust naturally. We're colleagues, but we're also friends. Sue Akins was texting me the other day. We chat on Instagram all the time.
Nice.
So building that trust was so important. If you're
Yeah, I
gonna just
think
sit
on
there and
we've talked to other DPs who said, on competition reality shows like The Apprentice or something, like you're just not allowed to mix with the cast at all. It's a very
100%,
different beast, those kind of big shows.
again, I did. This is why Like the Laziers is so successful. We were friends with our cast members. They trusted us. We trusted them. So going out to film was not only it was fun for everybody. Everybody wanted to be there. I always say that too. It's like Life Below Zero, all the crew members, we didn't have to be there. We wanted to be there. Like we were stoked. Like when you got that call, you're like, I'm leaving for a month to Alaska. This is going to be great. And that's why those shows translate so, so well. Because too, I've worked on shows where they're like, you will not say a single word to a cast member. And what happens is those cast members don't trust us because of the lack
Mm.
of communication. When they see our cameras, they just assume those cameras are there to catch them at their very worst. And then that translates and it just turns into this toxic environment. And you can't have that in the middle of Alaska, when you're living with someone who also lives alone, right? They want that camaraderie. They want that friendship, that closeness to, a lot of times when we'd leave, they'd be like, dang, I'll miss you. Like see you in a couple
Aw.
months, it's like, I mean, obviously they choose to live out there to be away from society, which I do not blame them. But they're, we are all friends.
Do
I
you guys
love
get
hearing
into
that.
that? Do you guys get into that with them a lot? Like, why here? Why live like this? Like, do you guys ever really just dig in and answer the why?
Sometimes because we do talk about it on the show, they like Jesse Holmes, he grew up in Alabama and train hopped and then ended up in Alaska and decided he wanted to be a dog musher. And it's just like sometimes these people are just estranged from society. Everyone has their own reasons. A lot of times it's they went up there looking for adventure and never left. That's a lot of people's reason for how they ended up in Alaska. But we don't dig too deep on that behind the scenes. I think because deep down we already know why. We don't really have to ask that. So it's not really a topic of conversation.
Yeah.
But people are fascinated with it. I mean, 23 seasons. Let's see, I have this written down. It was 23 seasons, 325 episodes. That's a lot of seasons. So people love this show and other Alaska shows that show this kind of alternative type of living off the grid. Do you think viewers kind of crave a less complicated life? Not that it's uncomplicated living off the land, but a less technologically based type of life, Do you think people want that? And that's what these shows do for the audience?
I think people like watching this kind of stuff because to them it's taboo. We are so influenced by technology and capitalism and living in a warm home with 3 cars and 6 bedrooms that seeing people who live off the land is just so fascinating because it's bizarre. They're like, what the heck? But in my mind, those are like the people that we film with, they're some of the happiest people. They are just on their own terms, doing their own thing. And I think people dream and wish they could do that because it to them it's a fantasy. To me, it's a fantasy. I would love to just like go live in a cabin and chop wood with my dog and my wife and wake up and be like, what am I gonna do today? Doesn't matter. It's up to me. So people, they clock out of their 9 to 5, come home, crack open a beer, turn on Life Below Zero because they're like, it brings them into this unknown reality that they can't even fathom because we are so consumed by what our society has made us like believe. It's just taboo to them.
I like that. I think, and I watched on the Joe Rogan show, he asked Sue, same question, why are you living out there? What are you doing? And she's like, I'm living. She said, it's the subsistence lifestyle is kind of romantic. There's all these YouTube, people out there doing these kind of shows, but she's connecting to nature and living life. Do a lot of people don't have a life outside of work? What are they doing? And I think Sue felt like, she was really living. And if she died out there because of the weather conditions or an animal, she was okay with that because she was living her life on her terms.
On our own terms. I completely agree. There would be a lot of times we'd be out there and we'd be done for the day, and I'd just go walk outside and stare at the sky or the northern lights or just take in that remoteness, that silence, that just like complete solitude and being removed and being like this it's different and she is living, they are all living, and they can tell thousands and thousands of stories that people will never be able to tell, and those are also the stories we were telling too with our cameras, right? And that's why
Mhm.
people are so enthralled by seeing that. So like these people are crazy and I'm like, no, these people are happy, like they love every day. And there are hardships that come with that, but like for me too, I enjoy that. I love those hardships, love a challenge. I didn't start working on that show because I thought it would be easy. Complete opposite, you know?
Yeah, what was the
Yeah.
hardest thing that you guys had to deal with, or the most
Yeah,
challenging part of the shoot?
I think, yeah, the most challenging was definitely the cold because with that it's just harder to live, harder to sleep. It's hard on the equipment, keeping batteries warm. Like if you say, you're out filming -50 degrees, then you go into one of their cabins to film and then you hop back outside, your camera's lens is going to completely freeze. Or if you bring it in, or I think it's the opposite. No, if you go from cold to warm, you have to let your camera thaw for like 2 or 3 hours because you have a little bit of condensation in your lens. So things like that, it's just like really, really hard in the cold. And on top of that, too, in Alaska in the winter, you only have like 4 or 5 days of light. So sun comes up at 10, starts setting at 2:30. You're like, we only have this much time to shoot. We need to get a lot done. So there's a little more stress to get the ball rolling, and everything moves slower in the cold. Snow machines bog down, things break compared to the summer, you have 24 hours of daylight. We'll crank out an 18-hour day and be like, "Whoa, let's slow our roll. We don't want to go home too soon. We want to make a little bit of money. We don't want to just like film everything in the first 2 days. Like, not that we were like intentionally dragging it on, but in the summer it's so easy to just crank out stuff and like just get it done because it's just you're just going. So winter was a lot tougher, cold especially.
And speaking of cold, like, did you have to take your gloves off to operate the camera? Like, how do your hands not freeze to death?
No, we wore gloves. We had these like they're called heat locks, and they're like a felt glove with leather palms. And they're thick enough to keep your hands warm, but you could still operate your camera. Flying the drone was probably the most painful because your hands are just still. And after if it's -35, -40, after 5 minutes, it's hurting a lot. And then sometimes you do have to take a glove off, and it's dangerous. We've had crew that's gotten frostbitten. And just dealing stuff with that.
Yeah, that's pretty.
Damn. Yeah,
And
yeah.
like
That's
with Sue, that I think I was texting you yesterday, but with Sue, that was the coldest location I've ever filmed. And we filmed one day and it was a wind chill of -60 degrees. I mean, it was brutally cold. Like we could
oh
only
wow.
film in 30-minute increments before we had to take a break. 'Cause it was physically dangerous, and that's why we had our safety person there like, how are you guys doing? Because as a crew, we'd want to keep going and be like, guys, I think we need to like seriously take a break. Like this is not worth like losing a finger.
What was the most rewarding scene you filmed or moment? Was there a moment that just kind of where you're like, yes, this was just so great and everything came together and you worked hard and it was beautiful?
Yeah, I think, some of the most heartfelt memories that I have from the show are when we have casts that are taking their children out to accomplish something for the first time. And like one of the best, and I wasn't DPing yet, but I was out on shoot with Rico DeWild, who he's an Athabascan native, and he was teaching his son how to shoot. It's like a mini shotgun. It's like a 40
Like a
cal or it's like a it's like a little kid shotgun, but his son
like a
was like real
22? Like a
not quite a
22?
22. It's still like a shotgun shell, but they're like small. I can't remember what the
Okay.
caliber is. But so it doesn't have a lot of kick, but you can still kill like waterfowl with it, small birds. And his son was like so scared to use it. He was like crying. He's like nervous about it. And then like later in the week, they went out and he shot his first ptarmigan. And it was just like a milestone in his life. And it's like capturing those moments and bringing them to TV too, but just being there for those is like so heartfelt because it's like it just kind of like reminds you of why you're out there and the purpose of the show. We're not only showing people what it's like to live out there, but we're showing the next generation too. These kids that are going to carry on these traditions and carry on these skills that are passed down for their parents or their elders. That was always like very sentimental for me. It wasn't just another hunt. It was a hunt, but that will be his first hunt that he'll never forget. And they're like, "What was it like killing your first ptarmigan?" He's like, "I did it with my dad, and also I had cameras on me. That was kind of cool." But it's more about doing it with his dad and it being like a first time thing.
That's wild because in a way you're documenting history
Yeah. Yeah, family
and
history for sure.
family history, but also just in the moment, like at this period of time in life, this is, you know, people are living off the grid in Alaska.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's neat. I like that.
Yeah, and it's amazing too because a lot of these handful of our cast members had kids, and throughout the years, their kids had kids, and we literally have been like
Wow.
filming these families growing and parents becoming grandparents on the show, and like new babies are on the show, and we're like, oh my gosh, like now we have a baby, like miking up the baby, you know? It's like, it's just like it's just been a part of these people's lives for over a decade, and so much can happen in 10 years, and it's cool to like see that.
And speaking of babies, congratulations to you. You're a brand new dad, less than a
Yep.
week.
Yep. I
Wow,
told my wife, I
congrats.
was like, if she starts crying, go upstairs, please. I was up at 4 a.m. this morning changing diapers. So yeah, brand new,
Wow.
brand new dad. She's 8 days old. So yeah,
Oh,
thank you.
congratulations. What is her
Yeah.
name?
Sage Alexandra Bitterfeld.
Oh, that's a
Yeah.
beautiful name.
Yeah. She's
Well, I
super
love that
cute.
we actually had this interview scheduled on her due date and she
Yes.
arrived on
On her due
time
date.
on her due
Yeah.
date.
Yeah.
So we
I
had to
thought it'd be
reschedule.
later. Yeah. I thought it'd be later. And you thought it'd be later too. No, that baby
It
was
was
almost born in my car.
Wow.
really? Wow,
Oh,
that sounds
yeah.
like a story. Wow.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
were you driving to the hospital and or what happened?
So, well, we labored at home for most of it, and we had doulas, but we had her at a birth center. We did it unmedicated. So, yeah, a
Nice.
birth center in Denver. It's
Warrior.
like 20 minutes away, but yeah, Taryn was like, "Oh my gosh, it's about to go down." I'm like, "Woman, I've got cloth seats. We are gonna make it to the hospital. This is bad." But it
Wow.
was a super healthy, smooth birth. It couldn't have gone any better. I thought I was gonna be traumatized. I'd been going to therapy about it. I was like, "I'm freaking out." It was great. It was awesome. I have only fond memories, so it's good.
That
So
is
thank you for
so wonderful.
rescheduling.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I was
absolutely.
like, "Oh, this is a little dicey to schedule on her actual due date," but I was like, "It's your first baby. They never arrive on time." Because
I know.
I've filmed 9 births
Oh,
on 16
wow.
and Pregnant on Teen Moms. So I
Oh
have a
my
little
gosh.
experience and they never
Yeah,
arrive on time. And I was like, "I
no.
think we should chance it." And sure enough, Sage was ready.
Yeah, I guess 10% of babies are born on their due date. She's part of that 10%. So, yep, it was,
Wow.
yeah, but
Maybe it
no,
was a
I'm
full moon. They tend to arrive on full
probably
moons.
was. Yeah, no, but I'm feeling great. I'm feeling very like high
Feeling
energy. So you got me at a
dad.
good time.
Good. You're a girl dad.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank
So
you.
will having a baby affect you going on these kind of crazy shoots for long periods of time?
Yeah, now that I'm a dad, it's definitely changed my views on how I'm going to navigate my career. I hate to say it, but I think everything happens for a reason, and LBZ could not have ended at a better time for me. Because as much as I loved going out there before I had a child, there were a lot of guys on that show that, FaceTiming mom with the baby, and
Mm,
you're out there 20 days. And typically on those shoots, they would let us know when we were flying in. We didn't know when we were going home. There was not like an out date. We didn't know our out
right.
date till we were like on our last episode and had a good idea of like when we would finish. So it's like, you know, people being out there away from their families I was like, I don't know if I want to be doing that. And I still do
Yeah.
work in TV, but a lot of shows, it's hard to say though too, because like those shows would film, like Below Zero, you'd go out for 18 days. And like a lot of mainstream reality shows is like they shoot the whole season in one go. So it's like a 3-month run. Like right now, I don't see myself doing that. I have a lot of other things I work on that have been able to sustain me financially. So that's kind of just what I'm sticking with. But it depends too. I remember I was actually on a shoot with Sherry in Egypt, and we were with the
Sherry.
direct. Yeah, back with Sherry. She's taking me all over the world. I love her. Yeah, and we were in Egypt, and I was talking to this director, and he's got a family, he's got like 3 kids, and I was like, "How do you make it work? Like, what's your advice?" He's like, My deal with my wife is I don't go on anything that's longer than 2 weeks." I'm like, "I love that." setting a boundary and sticking with that so everyone's on the same page. So yeah, it'll be really interesting navigating the freelance world as a dad because there's not a lot of consistency or stability. So yeah, but I feel good about it.
Good. I think
Yeah.
that's another thing that, the audience just doesn't understand, about the people making the film is that there's a lot of sacrifice that goes on, a lot of, just dealing with unpredictable schedules. And it is hard to have, a family and relationships. And, I think Bill Winters, we interviewed him, he's a DP, and he's like, you need a, a really good spouse to kind of understand this like weird world that we're in.
Yeah, we're kind of
And
a bunch of carnies. We just
that's
travel around the world, and
Yeah.
and that's too what I learned early on in my career is how important it is to be able to say no to some things. I think a lot of people
yes,
in our
yeah,
industry, because the work is so sparse or sporadic, it's so hard to say no. And
yeah,
when you say yes at the wrong time, that's when things can go bad in a relationship. But
for
also, yes,
sure.
having a supportive partner, but also understanding if they need you to be home, the work will come back. Everything's gonna be fine. I always try and remind myself, I'm like, wow, I've been freelancing for 10 years now. It's gonna be fine. I can pass this one gig off. It's full circle. It'll come back around.
Yeah.
So
Or you
finding
can
that
bring
balance.
yeah, it's not easy, it's not easy. But on speaking of Alaska, I was on Alaskan bush people, and we weren't in Alaska, actually. We were in northern Washington State, which is a whole other story.
Funny.
But I was there for months, and, I was like, I can't I was married by then. I was like, I can't leave my husband. We just got a puppy. I'm like, no. I'm like, I'm only can do this if they can come with me. And we were able to do that. We got a cabin, and it was big enough for us. And my husband was working remotely, and he was down, and we went out there with my puppy, and it was so fun. I mean, that made it doable, but it was only because my husband during COVID was able to work remotely.
Yeah,
But it really made it fun. It made it fun for me. Otherwise, it's stressful to be away from your family for so long.
it
I
is.
don't
It's
think
really
I would have said no if they weren't able to come, you
yeah.
know?
No, I completely get that. It's hard. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. It's really hard emotionally. And yeah, you got to be able to find that balance. And that was the thing I did too. When I would go out to Alaska or any show, especially if it's long, I intentionally take a huge break after. I rarely turn and burn unless it's like onto another really important shoot. But when I was working in Alaska, I'd film for about 18 days. I'd probably take 30 days off to be home and so my wife could have all my time and I could be there to support her and do things around the house, whatever. Especially now with having a child, and luckily I have support from my in-laws and my parents, so that's helpful. But it's still going to be, you know, difficult just navigating that new way of life.
And you met her while you were filming this, right? Because you said you started when you were single, and now 10 years later, you're married. So you
Yes.
met what did you tell her? Like, "I just travel the world," and
No, no. Well, no. Funny story. Taryn and I actually we met in college, and the day I met Taryn, I fell in love with her, and she basically friend zoned me for like 10 years. So she already knew what I was doing. And then we I was started working on National Geographic, and she took me on a trip to Japan where we kind of sealed the deal, and then we got married over COVID. So we were always really, really close friends before we got
so she knew
into
what she
a
was
Oh,
getting
that's good.
into.
yes. Yes and no. I don't think she might have been blinded by love a little bit, or I don't know, like because like it's still hard, but yeah, no, she knew what she was getting into, and she knew that this is my passion and what I love to do. And that's why it's worked so well because I have that support. I have someone in my life that understands that I've worked so hard to get here and can't just like change that.
Yeah, that's
Nice.
cool.
Yeah.
That's cool.
What are you working on now?
Well, right now I'm taking leave because of the baby. I actually have some shoots in the works that might take me back to Alaska, which will be exciting. I might be going to Valdez in a few months to film some professional skiing, which will be fun. And then
Whoa.
I might film for a new cruise line that is going up to Alaska, so I might hop on board. no pun intended, with that shoot.
So
So
because you filmed on Life Below Zero for 7 years and, won awards and, like, are you, like, the Alaska guy now? Like, for all these Alaska shoots, do people call you and say, "Gotta have Brian Bitterfeld on this shoot?"
oh, I
Do you
wish.
get pegged?
I hope that's how the phone call goes. Yes and no. I try not to actually find too many Alaska shows because I know so many locals that already live there, and the work
Mm.
that goes up there is so scarce that I prefer to hand that work off to them than to take that. Now, if I could get on a show again up there, like I actually recently reached out to the showrunner for Alaska State Troopers. That show's filming again. That's something I would hop on, but for smaller stuff, I just hand that off to my friends because 'cause I'm like, "You guys could, like, use this work because down in the lower 48, we just have so much more going on."
Yeah.
But it is funny because on LinkedIn, I reached out to someone, they were looking for crew in Alaska, and I was like, "I also have a lot of experience." They're like, "Actually, we'd love to hire you." So, it does help. It does kinda give me a foot ahead.
Well,
That's great.
especially because you have such a rare, unique set of skills, right, as adventure guy, like, that is definitely not for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, and I've kind of used that experience to leverage myself with other productions. I was doing a couple shoots with the Nature Conservancy, which is one of the largest conservancy nonprofits in America, and they do, animal and wildlife conservation. So being able to use that background and apply it to other things has been helpful so I can still do work on projects I'm passionate about and that get me outdoors that aren't just like cheesy reality shows.
Yeah.
So I worked on a lot of love shows after Life Below Zero, a lot of Lifetime stuff, which was fun, but I'm like, "Oh, this is so opposite of what I'm used to doing."
Yeah.
Uh Well, I think you do get kind of pegged in a certain way, in a certain genres. Like, oh, you do this kind of show, we'll hire you from that kind of show. Like if you do a wilderness adventure stuff, the chances of getting more of those type of jobs is highly likely.
Yeah, no, it's a total niche, and once you kinda have that bag of tricks per se, or that experience that not a lot of other people it gives you a lot of leverage. But it is funny too, because that adventure world is very small, and there are a lot of people that are like, extreme alpinists and high altitude climbers that have even more experience than I have. So then now I'm competing against those guys. So it is still very hard to sometimes get picked for those certain shows because you got other people that are all, you know, trying to eat the same fish, get at that same project.
Yeah.
So it's tough.
Right.
Yeah.
In recent years, the productions have decreased. The amount of productions being made each year has decreased over the last couple years, which makes it even a little tougher.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing too. It's like now if there's a show, there's even more people competing to get on that show. The way the industry's been the last couple of years has been really tough. A lot of things are changing. Obviously, we all know, Los Angeles and just Hollywood, the mergers, streamers. It feels like the only way to stay busy and successful right now is just to be able to pivot and work on new things, right? I have a lot of friends that worked in the industry as reality TV camera operators, and that's the only thing they ever want to do, and it's like, well, there's no show shooting. No one's going to call you. I found a lot of success working with nonprofits and doing corporate shoots and still applying my experience from reality TV into a new form of storytelling for productions that don't usually get this kind of experience. And I find that to be pretty helpful and successful.
That's a great idea. Yeah, just fill in the blanks with some other stuff. There's tons
Yeah.
everybody needs footage and
Yeah.
videos. Or
Yeah.
you
And
could
it might
start your
not,
own YouTube channel.
yeah.
When you're doing that kind of work, are you having to become a full one-man band as far as shoot, audio, edit? Are you having to kind of pick up wear those other hats when you do that stuff?
It depends on the budget. Sometimes yes, but usually no. Usually I'll be able to hire on audio and like an assistant camera person or producer. But I will typically try and edit because the way I kind of balance it out is like, oh, I'll do this shoot and then I'll also get paid to edit. And that edit time will take up that empty gap that I won't be shooting in until that next project comes along. Now, if I didn't have time to edit, I would hire someone, but I do work as an editor, so that's just an extra form of income for me. So that's helpful to like kind of like fill in those empty gaps in my schedule.
That's
That's cool.
smart.
Yeah,
to
but I
have
did
many
want to.
scenes.
I kind of thought like I wanted to start a podcast because I'm a dad now, and I
Oh,
wanted to make it a dad podcast, call it Dadcast, and just interview other fathers about their experience. Because what I learned is people don't care about the dads as much. Like dads get postpartum too. People get depressed. Like it's hard. And I thought I was like, wow, I could really use my experience as a DP and a cinematographer to make a really high end podcast interviewing dads. So that's
that's
just like
such a good idea. I
maybe a
love that.
passion project I might try and then start a YouTube account and maybe see where that goes and just like kind of like, I don't know,
We
bite the
can
bullet.
help. We can help
Yeah.
you. We can help
Yeah.
you.
So that's something I've thought of recently because I'm taking the next 4 months off. I'm taking off till April, unless
Oh,
I find
nice.
local work. But I was like, oh, I could start a podcast. That'd be really fun. Because we went to this birth center and we were in a group of 10 other couples. So I know 10 other dads or 9 other dads. So I was like, this would be great because they're all new fathers and we're all going to have our own different experience. So who knows?
You know, I love that. That's a great
That's great.
idea because I think dads do really have a different experience. Because I've filmed, like I said, tons of babies and stuff over the years. And, you know, the dads, it's like the first year, it's all about the mom, you know, because the mom is, you know, if they're breastfeeding, especially, you know, it's like all about the mom and the dad has to kind of figure out what they're doing. And then, you know, it takes a while for the kid to kind of look at dad like, oh, you're right. You're kind of cool.
Like how things have changed throughout the last couple decades. Like dads are way more involved now. You know, back in the 50s, like the dad wasn't even in the room with his wife when she was giving birth. It's like I'm not going to be in there. Now it's like I almost caught the baby. Like you know, it was a water birth. Like I was in it. I cut the cord. I was like, holy crap! So it was very intense. So
That's
things are just
brave.
different.
That's
Yeah.
brave of you.
Oh, you guys should see the video. We had doulas, and one of them was filming the whole birth, and I'm just sitting there on the tub sobbing. It's so funny. So funny. Brutal.
That's awesome. I love it. That is so cool. Well, congratulations on your new baby. That's
Thank you.
wonderful. And
Thank
all
you.
of the incredible work that you've done on Life
Thank
Below
you.
Zero and bringing all that magic to the screen. I think, you know, the fans abroad can appreciate all of your work and your willingness to sacrifice a shower. Use the loo. What'd you call it? The
Luggable Lou.
lug.
Take it wherever you go. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I love talking about Life Below Zero and what goes into it because, like I said, no one can even begin to describe the amount of effort and logistics that goes into making a show like that and how many people are involved and that don't get the recognition they deserve. So, yeah.
Yay.
Yeah.
It sounds very special. It sounds like a really special show. Not just, you know, the end product, but like the experience of it sounds like a special time.
Yep, completely.
Well, thank you so much. And we'll have to get Sherry on this show.
I would love that. I got her on Life Below Zero briefly. She was my producer for a few episodes.
Oh, she'd be
That's great.
great.
Yeah. Yeah, she did a good job. So
Brian,
Awesome.
thank you. Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
yeah, thanks guys.